Okay.
Right on.
Segment number 2, which I believe Josh leads us off on, is going to be the first appearance of Sonic Youth, a band we'll see plenty more over the years in both this decade, the 90s, and a couple times in the 2000s as well. Matt, what are the numbers?
Some numbers here. So Evol by Sonic Youth comes in at number 109 in the 1980s on Best Ever Albums, number 10 in 1986, number 728 of all time. It is Sonic Youth's fourth highest album on Best Ever Albums, behind Sister, Goo, and Daydream Nation. It did not make Rolling Stone's list from what I saw, and Sonic Youth is ranked as number 55 in the overall artist rankings on Best Ever Albums.
Sister Goo. Oh, those are two different albums.
Sister and
Those are
Goo.
two different albums,
Sister,
Josh, yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Sister from 87 and Goo from 1990.
All right.
We'll cover both, by the way.
Okay. So I know this is one of your favorite bands, John. We've
Sure
mentioned
is.
that before. I was interested because I don't really have, any kind of relationship with Sonic Youth. I think I had listened to Daydream Nation at one point, but
Now, I will say before you get into it, Josh, this album sounds very different than a lot of the other albums that we're going to cover, so I will put that in there.
Okay.
Yeah.
I see. Well, that's good to know. So overall, I enjoyed this album pretty much. I was expecting, kind of a lot more feedback and maybe in the vein of Jesus and Mary Chain type of sound, but overall I think the feedback was pretty restrained, or at least not like up front, so that the vocals still took like center stage and kind of, I don't know, I worked more in harmony with the rest of the music. So I kind of enjoyed that. The other big thing that I really like about this is that Kim Gordon sings as well, so she trades off, I guess, with Thurston Moore, depending on the song, or
Well, Lee Ronaldo sings on this one too, believe it or not.
okay.
Yeah, he sings In the Kingdom. 19 is his.
Oh,
Yep.
okay. Nice. So yeah, the fact that they have three different people that sing, I think that adds a lot of depth and variety to a band, and so I appreciate that. And the one thing that struck me is just how much this sounded like Nirvana, and like later on, like how people delivered the vocals when singing, kind of that flat singing voice that doesn't have a lot of emotion. I mean, that's kind of grunge in some respects, but it just did remind me of Nirvana in a lot of ways. Sometimes the other kind of thing about Sonic Youth, or at least on this album, is that their guitars often sound like they're off key or down tuned or something, and sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't work for me. It just kind of brings a unique, like, I don't know, like it brings like a moody, depressing sound to the music, probably intentionally, but my mileage varied on that part of it as well. But they had some instrumentals on here as well. Go ahead.
Real quick, Josh, Thurston Moore is known for playing with like pretty much exclusively alternate tunings.
Okay.
So that's a little bit, I think, of what you're hearing. He plays very few songs in traditional tuning. Like, it's kind of like his MO. So that's a little bit, I think, of what you're hearing.
Okay, yeah. So that takes some getting used to, especially when I guess I'm a basic bitch because I like traditional tunings or something. Who knows? But my favorite song on the album was Bubblegum, actually. That was kind of the one that had the most energy. I think that's actually a bonus track or something, or like not.
It's a cover too.
Oh, is it? Okay. That's probably why it sounds different. But I also liked other songs like Shadow of a Doubt, and basically I think I liked Kim Gordon songs more than the other ones. A Secret Girl, that was another one that has some piano on it, which I really liked as well. And then In the Kingdom 19, that parts of that reminded me of Cake, that song that they sang. And
you know who played the bass on that song and Bubblegum?
Who?
Mike Watt from the Minutemen.
Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Nice.
Yeah, he was a sort of a studio musician for them on a couple songs. Yep.
Oh yeah, I remember we talked about that crossing over.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, overall this was pretty good. I thought I'd be like, well, now that John said that this doesn't sound like the rest of their albums, I guess I'll just see. But I like this one.
Well, there's elements, but it's
Yeah.
definitely more avant-garde. Let's put it that
Okay.
way.
I see. Yeah, it is. Yeah, that's a good way to put it too. It is pretty avant-garde.
Okay, Matt, I think you're up. I'm actually
Mine
surprised you like this one, Josh. I have to admit. So
Yeah, I'm gonna have to disagree with Josh on this.
I figured Matt would hate this
Yeah,
album. Yes.
So I actually thought when the first couple of songs I was actually intrigued by. I kind of thought maybe I would like this. I think the first track in particular was a good way to open it. I did like Tom Violence. I think it definitely pretends to what's going to come later on in like late 80s, early, in 90s. This is definitely the alt rock, kind of grunge. There's a lot of that foreshadowing of what's to come later on. So like Nirvana, stuff like that, Josh, that you picked up on, and many other bands as well. So I was like, okay, all right, because my history and my with Sonic Youth has not been one that it's not a band that I've typically gravitated towards. That it's stuff that I've heard of it has been difficult for me to get into. And just the more that this album went on, I was getting that feeling again. And it really started with In the Kingdom, number 19. I struggled with that. I also struggled with Secret Girl. These spoken word songs, I struggle with that. And if you're going to do that, have something musically behind it that I can get down to. I could kind of get down with some of the music of Secret Girl, like there's like a piano, there's like a cool eerie piano part that's playing in the background, which I kind of liked. I didn't like the way it started. It was just a bunch of noise at the beginning, and then like it get into this piano part that was cool. And then Kim Gordon gets into this thing that reminded me of one of the Patti Smith songs, where she's just like, it's just like spoken word poetry that's, I don't know, to me comes off as somewhat pretentious, and it doesn't resonate with me really at all as a musical piece. It's a separate thing for me, and and I'm not like one for, spoken word poetry generally speaking anyway. So I struggled with that. And then some of the songs in between, like I struggled with like Death to Our Friends, Marilyn Moore, Expressway to Your Skull was also like something about Madonna, Sean, and Me or something like that. I think they changed the name of that, or maybe that was the original song title, or maybe there's some story there. But yeah, to me, it drones. It's a very drony kind of sound. John, I was reminded of some of your comments about that the first time we covered the Velvet Underground with White Light, White Heat, when you were talking about how cold and distant that album was. I felt like that with this record. I felt
I mean, there's similarities between like what they're going for here and that album. Yeah, they take it in a different direction, but you're right. I mean, I
felt this was distant from me. I felt like, like they're not terribly interested in like connecting with me, and I'm not terribly interested in connecting with them really. And it just, I listened to it several times. I gave it a fair share, and it wasn't for me. The discordant nature of a lot of what's happening here just didn't really have any direction for me. Didn't really pick up in certain, incorporate, other things that were more. I don't need it to be like 100% melodic, but have something in there that I'm going to grab, whether it's a melody or it's a like a bass line or a beat or something like that. I found very little here that made me get to that point. So I'm going to go with thumbs down on this. I'm glad that John said that this is different. This isn't what I'm hoping to like some Sonic Youth, because I definitely understand their influence, and people love this band, man. And a lot
they're
of
going to be
bands
hard for you, Matt. I'm not going to lie. I don't know. We'll see.
We'll see.
I
know that. I mean, the only other album that I knew was Murray Street, which I know, John, that you've told me that's from like 2002. I just bought it. Yep. I don't even remember why. I'm like, let me buy a Sonic Youth album, and you were like, that's one of the worst albums that you could have bought to get into Sonic Youth.
It's not a bad album, but I don't know if it's representative. Shall we say? Yeah.
So I would like to come out of here with like at least some affinity for Sonic Youth. It might not happen. Like I said, I know a lot of bands that I do like them, and they're highly regarded, but man, this is tough. This was a tough sell for me, so I'm gonna have to go thumbs down on this, unfortunately.
Yeah, this is so I mean, I think it's pretty well known that I'm a Sonic Youth guy. Like I'm a fan of what they do. I get lost kind of in their essence a little bit with the chord choices. I find them extremely interesting as a band. I kind of put them in the same category as when you hear about musicians who like krautrock or avant-garde rock, and because I have always been intrigued by their confrontational nature, because I don't find them to be as a melodic, I guess, as some truly avant-garde stuff, and so there's just enough to kind of keep me in. There's if I were to make a list of like top 20 Sonic Youth songs, like Star Power would certainly be on there. I think that's a pretty fantastic song, both lyrically and sound wise. Madonna, Sean and Me. There was a side project of Sonic Youth called Chacon Youth that a couple members were in. That was kind of an outshoot of that. That's the whole thing right there. They do a cover of like Into the Groove by Madonna as well, which is interesting. But I think it's the thing I noticed, and I'm going to kind of go into a little bit more of my knowledge. This was the first album that Steve Shelley is on, who's Sonic Youth's drummer, and I think Steve Shelley is a very recognizable drummer when you hear him. He has like the fills that he does are very much in conjunction with the chaos of the swirling guitars of Thurston Moore and Lee Ronaldo, right? Like his drums can be piercing, right? But then they can also fall behind the guitar. So you kind of forget they're there for a while, and then they like absolutely come to the forefront and just so almost like startle you a little bit. Probably the best example for those that might not be super familiar with Sonic Youth, but might do some stuff is like Teenage Riot, I think is probably a good example of a song that has the drum playing in there along with the whirling guitars. But yeah, this is the intersection between the super experimental Sonic Youth of the early years. I'm talking, I mean, if you think this stuff is cold, Matt, the early stuff is basically just like art project stuff, right? Where they're just, messing around and doing sounds, and, Bad Moon Rising that was before this was, I would say, a harsher album. There's stuff like early, like Confusion is Sex and stuff, like their early albums, which I consider them for Sonic Youth to be kind of like what the early albums were for the Replacements, where you almost don't recognize like where they are as a band to some degree. This is where they start putting together some pop sensibility. Steve Shelley comes in and kind of adds that signature sound to it. And then we go into like that run of albums that come in the SST Records era. This is the first SST Records album, right? Because this is when they're trying to expand beyond hardcore. Sonic Youth's one of the first bands they bring in. And you can see a little bit of how hardcore has some elements in this. How, Mike Watt's playing on this. You could see a little bit of how the Minutemen and Sonic Youth overlap. You can see how the Velvets, right, were such an influence for them. And like Josh said, you can also see how they were influences on a lot of bands that played, that had feedback-heavy guitar and flat vocals. And also Sonic Youth has the ultimate, like, indie vibe, right? Like, they are not seeking credibility, right? They are almost notoriously anti-careerist, right? And they're just cool. Like in an era when there aren't many cool people, Sonic Youth is a definitively cool band. They seem cooler than the room pretty much in every room they're in, even when they're with cool people, right?
They're very Gen X.
They're like, they're, but it's funny because they're actually a little older than Gen X.
Yeah.
Kim Gordon, it's like, she was almost 40, right, in the early 90s when it was there, which is always amazing to me. But yeah, they have that sort of that idea of what it is.
I don't care, slacker kind of. Yeah.
But like, I don't care, but I also care deeply about the things I care about, right? And we're going to put out an album and we seem like we're some of the few people who actually don't give a shit if you like it or not, because we put it there. And There will be a lot more to talk about. I am actually kind of fascinated for you guys to listen to albums like Sister and Daydream Nation and Goo and I mean there's a bunch we're going to cover that take them in different directions. But yeah, this one is still When They're Challenging You. It's funny at the end of it that they put bubblegum on there. It's almost a little bit of I find a joke a little bit because it's like a 2 minute and 49-second song that is like an homage to the 50s and 60s sound, almost like that Phil Spector type sound. But Sonic Youth is not that type of sound at all. But it's a little bit, I think it's a little bit tongue in cheek, their choice of cover there, and they're always interested in pop culture. So the fact that they're looking at the Madonna and Sean relationship as it's going off. I mean, she's the ultimate pop star, right? So they're sort of voyeuristically looking at that. They write a song called Star Power. So there's a lot here. I always am interested in what's on Kim Gordon's mind. She's an interesting person to read the lyrics on because she's almost like a performance artist to some degree. So from that end of things, she's always commenting on society, but in an atypical way. So yeah, I enjoyed this. There's going to be Sonic Youth albums that come down the road that I like a little bit more. For some people, the more confrontational, the more they like it. I do like when they tighten it up a little bit to have a little bit more tunefulness. So I'll lay my cards out there. But yeah, I like this one, and I've said before, Sonic Youth is the ultimate headphones music for me. I put headphones on, and I probably should also mention that we haven't really done any shoegaze albums yet, and this is definitely the beginning of what shoegaze is going to sound like. So just an FYI, guys, I was like listening to it, I was like laughing, I was like, oh, okay. Like I've sort of mentioned shoegaze for some of the things we've done and how this is the beginnings of it, but boy, this is where like the real shoegaze starts coming, and it's going to be an entree into what's coming. So they are certainly proto
gaze,
shoegaze, proto like 90s indie. Who I know like loved this album was Neil Young. Was like a huge fan of this album.
That doesn't surprise me.
Mm-hmm. So and you can absolutely see the overlap there, can't you?
Yeah. And fun fact, that Bubblegum song was a cover written by Kim Fowley. I never heard of this guy. He was the manager of the Runaways.
Mm-hmm.
So there you go. Just saw that.
Yeah, they have a little bit of a sense of humor sometimes too that gets built in. So pay attention for that as we go along. But yeah, I like this one, and I think. When we did this podcast so many years ago, one of the things I thought was going to be, there were a couple things I was like, oh, I can't wait to see Matt or Josh respond to these things, right, that I knew they weren't familiar with. And one, I knew both of you guys weren't super familiar with Sonic Youth. So I was like, at the very least, they're now going to have to say they listened to these albums so they'll have a definitive opinion on it instead of just being like, oh, they exist as your thing, John. So, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they are kind of like art rock meets coffee house meets, I don't know, depressing emo person or something.
Now, see, you keep saying I don't find Sonic Youth depressing. To be, there are songs that are certainly heavy. Like there's a song coming up that we'll talk about. Kim Gordon's brother had schizophrenia, and there's a song called Schizophrenia that comes up that is a really profound song, but also has like an eeriness, but also like a touchingness to it. Yeah. But like, I don't find this sound depressing. I find this sound
uplifting,
immersive. No, not uplifting.
It is immersive. No,
that's I think for me, I think it's the kind of that alternate tuning. I somehow like associate that with like sad sounding music for some reason, or depression.
I tend to agree with you a little bit more on that, Josh. I think it's, I mean, I wouldn't say I'm like depressed listening to this, but there is like the minor key off tune chord, like the droning sound. It's a little on the mopey side that I hear as well. So not the most depressing I've heard. It's not like the definitive.
No. Well, you wanna hear Thurston Moore talk about his view on alternative tunings? A quote right here.
Yes, please.
Quote from, he said, well, first of all, they talk about, there's an interview that they gave where they said Sonic Youth could only afford cheap guitars, and cheap guitars sounded like cheap guitars. But with weird tunings or something jammed under a particular fret, those humble instruments could sound rather amazing. So Thurston Moore said, it was the odd tunings are an attempt to introduce new sounds. When you're playing in standard tuning all the time, well, things sound pretty standard. Rather than retune for every song, we generally used a particular guitar for 1 or 2 songs, and we take dozens of instruments on tour. And basically, they looked at it as the different guitars could play different tunings, and it was like a different sound each time. Yeah. So, and Moore said that his influence for his sound was Velvet Underground, Wire, The Stooges, and Patti Smith. So
yeah. And I respect all that. It just
and Minor Threat, who we never covered.
Yeah, it just didn't work for me on this. So
yeah, I get it completely.
I will give them a shot next time around, whatever the next one is.
It's going to be Sister. It's going to be the next one.
Okay.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
That's ranked just ahead of this, so that's a better album than this, according to Lester. So there you go.
Got it.